Good morning, everybody. Today is Friday, March 21st. It is 9:48 a.m. This is the House of Commerce and Economic Development Committee, and we are here with our intern, Helen Parkers. Good morning, Helen. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. For the record, I'm Helen Hargraves, the legislative intern for the House Committee on Economic Development and the senior at the University of Vermont. So what I have today is the report for the CTE governance structure, right? And I'm wondering, do you want me to go through the whole thing? Have you looked at it at all?
I
Or
have not had a chance to look at it yet. I don't know if anyone else has, and it's emailed to us. I guess you don't have it? Did you not have it? Okay.
it's the one that I sent on Wednesday.
I think I saw it. Great.
Yeah, I know you posted it on the
It's at the district.
website, yeah.
I did post it. Yes. Did you post on today's calendar? Thank you.
Good. And then we have a hard stop at 9. Is that right?
I believe that's correct.
Then you heard from Nicole McTavish and Jody Emerson yesterday, I think. So I can start with Southwest Tech and River Valley Tech Center. Board members, they have 11 board members, and the method of selection, according to Superintendent Meg Honsinger, is Australian ballot.
Let's back up for a second. So Helen took a look at the 4 independent districts that are tech centers to figure out what's working for them, what's not working for them. If we want to have a single tech district for the state, what can we learn from the tech districts that we already have in the state, and how do we use that information going forward?
That's a good point. I will actually zoom out a little bit and just do a quick summary of the overall feedback. So the key takeaways that I put at the top of the report are that every superintendent I spoke with said that they would much prefer that CTE governance be determined after they have been able to see what public education reform looks like in general. I think Jody Emerson and Nicole McTavish talked about that yesterday as well. But all 4 superintendents were pretty adamant that it would be much more efficient for CTE if they could determine the number of districts after they've seen how it plays out in K through 12 public education. The directors have been meeting on a weekly basis, and I don't know if they communicated this to you, but they told me that they intend to send a letter to the legislators. I don't know if that's this committee specifically or in general, that gives feedback on pieces of the proposal for CTE. And then moving forward, the goal of this report was to get an idea of their governance structure, each one's governance structure, what's working, what could be improved. So the Patricia A. Hannaford Career Center has 11 board members. Those board members 4 are appointed by the sending school districts. Nicole said that each district has its own process and she can't speak to that. But the other 7 are industry experts that are recommended to and appointed by the PAHCC board. So I think a general note as well is that the autonomy is a very attractive quality for each of these career tech centers, because what Nicole McTavish spoke about is that they don't have to go through layers of bureaucracy and red tape, particularly for funding. I think that's a big concern. Scott Farr, I believe it was, noted his concern that the governor's proposal includes a supervisory role by the Agency of Education. I believe that CTE is encompassed in that, and he would much prefer that there be a separate CTE board that governs only CTE. I think that has to do with sentiments that were echoed again by multiple superintendents, that in the past, it has been felt that funding hasn't been able to trickle down to CTE through the general system, and that it's often difficult to coordinate with school districts. Let's see. In terms of challenges and improvements, since you heard from Nicole and Jody yesterday, do you want me to go ahead and start with Megan, Scott, and stuff?
And anything that is consistent.
Okay. Yeah. So what's working for Southwest Tech? She says that autonomy is great. It is Meg that said that before her time, it was felt that it was very difficult to coordinate with a supervisory union. And she believes that the independence solves that problem. Challenges and improvements. She is concerned about the proposal that in effect would reduce tuition to 25,000 for the next year. Both she and Scott said that they feel they have been cut down to the bone in terms of staff. Neither feel that they have surplus staff to cut. And Scott specifically said that any more cuts would most likely result in having to cut program, which for River Valley Tech Center would be concerning because their enrollment is up in general. RVTC is in the middle of recruitment season and already ahead of last year's enrollment by 50%. In terms of, consolidation, I spoke about that already. But Meg Hansinger specifically says that it's important to consider how the decisions being made around consolidating into one single district would affect medical insurance, collective bargaining, salary, things like that. Thus far, for RVTC, what's working, and this was repeated by multiple superintendents, is that taxpayers have shown strong support for tech centers. They approved the budget at almost 75% this past year. And again, enrollment is up. Challenges and improvements, his mainly had to do with the governor's proposal. Funding is also an issue. He says that the proposal that each school district receive 13,000 in funding if a student attends a regular public school, but only 5,000 if that student attends a CTE center, creates an adversarial relationship between the two. And he says that disincentivizes schools from sending students to CTE centers. And he says that's something that CTE directors have been saying for years. In terms of support from the committee, he was the only one who spoke specifically about that, but he, I think, feels that support on the budget is a priority, base funding. He says that base funding has decreased by 3%. Last year, I believe it was, and he's reduced staff in the last few years. He's done everything he feels that has been asked of him regarding that. But costs are increasing, enrollment is increasing, and he feels that any funding should match the projections for those increases. And I think his main point was also that the governor's proposal, all this focus on it, and the reform to K through 12 and CTE is distracting from changes that could be made, as he says, in the interim. He says that rules and regulations around access to curriculum and graduation requirements can be changed more immediately and would be helpful in removing barriers to access to CTE for Vermont students. He didn't specify any of those specifically, but that was his take. And let's see. I believe it was Jody Emerson too. I don't know if she spoke to you about this, but one of her challenges was that each sending school has different graduation requirements. And so what she would like is to either have CTE specific graduation requirements or statewide graduation requirements, so that they don't have to coordinate and figure out for each sending school how to get those students through to graduation while also allowing them to access career technical education. And she spoke to me about her idea for a comprehensive high school, which would essentially be a four-year high school with opportunities to explore CTE offerings for 9th and 10th graders, and then the opportunity to transition into full-on CTE courses in 11th and 12th grade while meeting graduation requirements.
Are you able to get a sense of which of the tech centers have capacity and which ones are at capacity and full? And some of them I could see it pretty clearly, but I'm curious.
So CVCC, Central Vermont Career Center, is facing excess demand for their programs. I believe the PAHCC is not. Patricia A. Hannaford Career Center, yes. No, it's I don't understand half of the letters that are thrown at me.
I love
so.
these acronyms.
Yeah.
Yeah, my brain exploded a little.
Yeah. And then, as I said before, our VTP is seeing a solid increase in enrollment, I think. So facing, if not excess demand, a solid amount, and he is concerned that having to cut programs would reduce their ability to meet that demand. In terms of Southwest Tech, I don't have a conclusive idea, but there was no concern expressed about demand in either direction. She did add, she really appreciated the opportunity that the Listen and Learn tour gave to CTE to have a voice. And she said that was really valuable for getting feedback and having healthy conversation around it. Yeah.
You know, if anybody has any quick questions, I think we might have time for one or two questions. I apologize that we're cutting into your time this morning, but we have an amendment to hear about a bill that we have. Anybody have any quick questions?
Great report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, you guys.
Thanks for working with us. Yeah. It's very, very helpful.
I'm happy to.
I think we're gonna bring Zach Harvey up as the bringing an amendment to us.
Did you get it, Grace? Great, thank you very much.
Representative Hardy, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Appreciate your time.
I appreciate yours.
Go through the language with Rick, but I think if you can probably give us an overview of what your thoughts are on this amendment.
Sure. And I think it'd be helpful, right, to capture the spirit of the changes and and my recommendations for it. But first, I want to start by saying thank you to you, Mr. Chair and Madam Vice Chair and Mr. Ranking Member for your time this morning and the broader committees, because I really look around this room and I see a lot of familiar and friendly faces that I really have been able to call friends since the start of this biennium. So I'm very grateful for that. And I'd also be remiss if I didn't take a moment of personal privilege to wish the member from Bradford a happy birthday, because I do understand it is the member's birthday. So happy birthday, member. So I have to say that it's a special day. So I think, taking it from the proposed changes, and I think I do want to kind of level set at the outset by saying, regardless of how my remarks on the floor may have been interpreted by some members, I think we're all actually very much aligned on what the hope and the intent of this bill is going to accomplish. And I just want to start by saying that at the outset. And I think, and I said this to the speaker yesterday, is that we are probably much closer. The two sides of the river are much closer. And I think this amendment is hopefully the bridge to kind of bring those sides totally aligned. So the purposes of the amendment are really focused on strengthening the protection of public servants by closing some of the loopholes that I believe existed in the original bill. It expands coverage beyond data brokers to all commercial entities that publicly disclose sensitive personal information, and it introduces a fair and enforceable framework that ensures compliance without unnecessary penalties on businesses or public agencies. And lastly, I think the key thing that this is going to accomplish is it focuses on immediate removal of dangerous information rather than prolonged litigation. So to run through some of the key changes and the justifications behind those changes is, number one, we have an expanded coverage for public servants. So what changed? The amendment expands covered persons to include all government lawyers, jurors who have served in the last 18 months, recognizing potential retaliation against these individuals that are serving their communities, and members of the General Assembly who are increasingly facing more critical threats on a daily basis. Why are we making this change? These individuals face heightened risk due to their roles in law enforcement, prosecution, and governance, and other states have already included these protections, namely Oklahoma and New Jersey. Moving on to change number 2 is applying the law to all commercial entities, not just data brokers. What change? It replaces data broker with commercial entity, ensuring all businesses that disclose personal information fall under the law. The change was made because I believe that the original bill ignored the major sources of exposure like Google, real estate websites, and social media platforms. Going further, if the goal is removing dangerous information, we should not limit enforcement to a niche category of business. Change number 3 is holding public agencies accountable. What changed? Public agencies are now subject to the same removal requirements as businesses. If they fail to remove the information within the 15 days allotted by the committee in the original bill, they can be ordered by the courts to comply. This change was made because public agencies are often some of the biggest sources of leaked information, be it voter registration, court records, or town offices. Protecting officials must start with state and local agencies and not just private business. Change number 4 is that there is going to be stronger enforcement through injunctions instead of fines. What changed? We've replaced the monetary damages and fines with a legal injunction process. If a company or agency refuses to comply, they can be taken to court. Violating an injunction results in mandatory attorney's fees and court costs paid to the covered person. The change was made because fines don't work against big tech. Large companies just factor them in as the cost of doing business, and the injunctions force real compliance, ensuring dangerous information is actually removed rather than just penalized. The 5th change is that the reporting and transparency requirement, and I think this should be looked upon very favorably by the committee. What's changed? The state court administrator must report annually on 1, the number of injunctions filed, granted, denied, or appealed, the number of violations and attorney's fees awarded. And the reason that I'm requesting to make this change is it provides accountability to ensure the law is working as intended. It ensures lawmakers can make adjustments if needed based on real-time data. And the 6th and final change is we've modified the definition of disclose. What changed? Changing the definition of disclose to publicly post or display. The change was made to strike the right balance between privacy and public access. Now, I can imagine there's probably a few questions about these proposed changes from members on the committee, so I want to take a stab at trying to address some of those concerns on the front end. Why remove monetary damages in private lawsuits? Doesn't big tech deserve to pay? What I would say to that is the goal is compliance, not litigation. Big tech treats fines as a cost of doing business, as I said earlier in my testimony, whereas injunctions enforce real action. Mandatory attorney's fees for violations ensure covered persons still have legal recourse regardless of their socioeconomic background, which I think is one of the key components in making sure that the covered individuals have access to these legal remedies. A second is, why not allow individuals to sue companies directly? And what I would say to that is a private right of action would lead to frivolous lawsuits, benefiting trial lawyers more than victims, and injunctions provide faster relief, preventing long, expensive legal battles, which I think we would all agree is a benefit. The focus should be on getting dangerous information removed, not on generating lawsuits. A third question that I think I want to anticipate is, how do we ensure public agencies actually comply with these proposed changes in this amendment? Agencies must remove data within 15 days of receiving the request. If they fail, a court can order them to comply. Violating an injunction has legal consequences, and transparent reporting ensures that we can track agency compliance, which I think is obviously a key consideration here. Another is, what if this law gets ignored like other data privacy laws, which I'm sure is a key concern by many in the room. And unlike voluntary compliance laws, this amendment allows for court enforcement. Covered individuals can go straight to court if their information isn't removed. Companies and agencies risk court-ordered removal and paying attorneys' fees in violations. And lastly, why not just ban companies from collecting this information at all? Which I know that the business-to-business component was raised in the committee testimony leading up to this bill reaching the floor. And my response would be, a blanket ban would be unconstitutional and likely struck down in court. This bill focuses on preventing public disclosure of sensitive data while avoiding First Amendment challenges, which are currently happening in New Jersey. We target real-world risks without overreaching. And in closing, I would say this amendment really seeks to strengthen the original bill by closing loopholes, expanding protections, and making enforcement effective. It creates real accountability for both public agencies and private businesses. It prioritizes immediate protection over endless litigation. And lastly, I urge the committee to support this amendment and to ensure that we pass a law that actually protects those who serve our state. And I'm obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you. What happens if a business fails to comply with an injunction?
So I think one of the key challenges, Mr. Chair, is when I was working through these proposed changes and trying to understand how damages could potentially be defined. I think that was a really hard thing for any of us who are in support of this amendment or the original bill to kind of wrap our head around. So my main goal is for those that are bringing legal action in the courts to be able to recoup the costs that they incur by taking action to big tech or whoever the defendant might be. So the legal remedies are in place to make sure people recover what was lost, but there's not going to be additional damages because I think that's a very hard thing to define.
What can a court do to make sure that an entity complies? So if an entity doesn't comply with an injunction, what are the remedies to the court?
I mean, like I said, the main thing, hopefully we're assuming that there are good actors in the world and that these entities are going to comply with that. But I think one of the main, you do have the legal injunction there, but again, this amendment is different in the original bill, that there are not damages awarded, and the court will be enforcing the injunction as it comes. I don't know if Rick, if you have anything that you want to add.
I think the question is, what remedies does the court have? Not the person that is being injured, but what are the, and there's probably more for Rick, but I don't know if you, because of because of the committee you're on, I didn't know.
Well, and I think, and to be honest, I think when Chair Lalonde came in here, one of the components that we were looking at, and I know that you received testimony from the Attorney General. I was here for that testimony as well. There are some considerations, right? Does the Attorney General get involved in this under the consumer protection lens? And I think, her testimony kind of indicated that she wasn't overly thrilled with that concept. The other component, which again, I'd be open to having the conversation, of course, is, do we start bringing in a criminal component? And that was a challenge that was brought up in the House Judiciary is, say, I just use Google as an example, but say Google is in violation of some of these, court injunctions. A criminal component would allow, the complainants to require a deposition from senior leaders at Google that would require them to come here in the state and defend their actions and hold people accountable. The bill as proposed and the bill as amended really lack that criminal enforcement component. So I do think that's a fair concern that you raised, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, because right now it's civil,
Right.
but there's generally remedies and,
And that hasn't changed from the original.
but it's still, I mean, testimony that we received, there are companies out there that do not listen to court orders.
Certainly. And that's a concern I share.
And I wonder what the remedy is to force them into compliance.
Sure. I think that's a fair, fair concern.
So when you said remove about I guess, thank you for putting the time into this. It's comprehensive and it's looking at things a little bit differently. But when I was listening to you, I was a little bit confused because you used the word remove data. Does that mean keep private? Or does that mean actually requiring businesses to remove data from their data banks?
Remove, not delete. So it's consistent with the original bill.
It's
So-
just
so
redacted.
keep-
It's just redacted.
Keep it private.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's right.
same. The language, I was not.
I appreciate,
I
yeah.
have not had enough time to look at that.
No, I understand.
In what is the process? I haven't had a chance to read it, obviously, I mean, I've got it up, but what is the process where an individual would ask, for example, Google, like, is there a set process or form, or how do they ask to have their data removed?
Yeah, there is, and I would defer to Rick on the process.
We'll wait till you.
Yeah, I think I mean, the process, it really hasn't changed materially from the bill that Representative Priestley proposed.
I have 3 questions, and thank you for submitting this and taking the time to do it.
You bet.
So just first on the governmental piece, as far as having municipalities, state governments, all of that caught up in this, did you reach out to Agency of Digital Services, Secretary of State, and VLCT to kind of check in on how much time this would take and how much it would cost in order for all of those entities to be trained and able to have systems in place to mark information as being like private or removed? Or I understand you kept the not deleted piece, but
Testimony was not taken on that.
okay. And then as far as the publicly posted information, so can you I want to make sure I'm understanding that that like if I Google Zach Harvey on Google and your thing shows up, but then it is a Spokio that I used in committee the other day.
Yep.
So the result may be something like, well, we have Zach Harvey's address, but you have to click here and pay $1 to get it. It would still allow all of that information, anything that's actually private in a searchable database that can be paid for. Like that, this doesn't help this at all because it's publicly posted information, not behind a paywall.
Not my understanding. I would defer to Rick on, Rick will keep me honest on this, but my understanding is, thinking through if one of the covered persons posts their own information voluntarily, I think that's where we're kind of getting into, distinction on limitations of the applicability of the law. But I think it would cover, the Spokio.
That's actually, yeah, that's actually going into my last question. So you have the protected information, what is the line in here? Protected information does not include protected information that a covered person voluntarily and publicly discloses on or after July 1st, 2025. So how does that mean that like permanently, if I put my address on my legislative website, I put it on there forever, I chose to publicly disclose that. So forever, I have no recourse in asking that ever be removed because I chose to make it public at one point in time. Is that what this is getting at, or are there ways that I can then be protected in the future?
I would let Rick comment on that.
Thanks.
Yeah, so thanks for coming on.
It's good to see you.
I think that's good, to put things on the table here.
Yeah.
So we can see it and think about it. From my perspective, just big picture in terms of policy, it's about creating a reasonable standard of conduct.
Mhm.
Right? Who's covered and, what they're going to do. But also, well, if you create a rule, a standard of conduct, how do you enforce it? right? And I'm trying to wrap my head around what you've done. I'm just quickly looking at it. I think I'm wondering whether we're asking a little much of individuals and the courts, frankly, in terms of their ability to enforce the standard that we create. You know, so whatever the standard is, how do you make sure that that's for? I think we're at. It sounds to me, I'm not sure that we may be asking a little too much of an individual, as well as the courts. You know, and I come from a regulatory background.
I know you do.
Right. And when you have trouble having individuals and the courts, you know, resolving what should be the standard has been violated. I usually look for some additional means to enforce that standard, you know, and whether it's in terms of the damages that were proposed originally or some other mechanism. I think it's, especially with very big entities that have a lot of power and information advantages. I'm concerned that about whether this framework would be effective.
Sure. So to address it, I guess a couple points there. The thing that I was trying to wrap my head around, and one of the concerns that I have is when you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar multinational corporation, I don't think that the damages outlined, even in the original bill, were actual enforcement. I mean, we can disagree on the structure of that, but like having worked for one of those companies, I don't think it actually would force them to comply. The second thing is I do think that there's this element of self-advocacy that I think is really important. So say if I get sick or someone in my family gets sick, you know, we really have to be our own personal health advocates with the healthcare system, with our doctors. And so I do think that there is that element. And, you know, I wouldn't think of it as a burden on the individual. I think it empowers the individual to take their own data privacy and, you know, the elements of that in their own control. So I fully appreciate and understand your perspective, but I would maybe differ on practice.
Hey, we're in a business of
That's right.
sharing different
Respectful
perspectives.
discourse.
My perspective is that this kind of construct would result in a weaker enforcement mechanism than what we originally had in the bill. But willing to listen to other perspectives.
Yeah, I guess following on that, I think my question is sort of maybe a little bit philosophical, but there's a question about like, as an individual, what is the value of my data?
Mhm.
And if there are repeated violations of data broker or whoever putting my information out there after I told them not to, I'm still very curious about like what is the stick that is going to prevent them from continuing to repeat those violations.
Yep.
And then, you know, they're also again back to what value does my data have if that data is part of their company asset value.
So I guess the thing that I come back to is the distinction between the value of data and the proposed damages, right? Like the thing that I'm having a hard time reconciling, and which this kind of goes back to the amendment and to the bill as proposed, is I think it's very hard to quantify what our personal data is valued at. No question there's value there. And then it kind of goes back to understanding damages and understanding, you know, how can we attribute a value to damages? I don't know if there is a, you know, kind of a method calculation there.
I mean, I'll tell you what the question is going to be, then I'm going to get to why I have that question.
Sure.
The question is we're talking about injunction versus private right of action for damages. And my question is, why not both? And the reason why I asked that question is certainly I hear you and I agree that multi-billion-dollar corporations, the damages are not going to be are not actually going to get them to change their behavior because it's such an insignificant amount to them. However, and so there's the value in the injunction process and all that stuff, and trying to get them to do what they're supposed to. But you know, this bill at its heart is about protecting our civil servants. So that we don't, so in case of situations where the Daniels Law arose. And one could argue that there were real damages so let's say a civil servant in Vermont gets shot and killed, or a family member of theirs gets shot or killed. Is it sufficient for their family to just sue for the court costs, or should there be at least some kind of restitution to the family? And, and yes, that restitution is a drop in the bucket to the big company, but it might be more than that to the family of the deceased. And so why not both? What would be?
So I completely agree with the member that indeed would be a horrific tragedy should it occur, and God forbid, I hope it does not ever in this state or any other. The thing that I would say should that horrific incident occur is that we're now venturing into the criminal world, where there is going to be far more litigation beyond an injunction of just public disclosure. I mean, my thinking is the issue that I had with the original bill as proposed was that there was really no ceiling on what restitution looks like. I would be open and amenable to including damages or fines within a limited capacity. The Oklahoma model, which you've heard me refer to both on the floor and in this room today, it does allow for almost like if the injunction is granted, it adds for like almost immediate restitution in a much more limited and confined capacity. I would totally be open to including something like that.
We just argued previously though that whatever that penalty was, it's just a drop in the bucket.
Right.
So and I think that's why we have judges to make those decisions on what's fair restitution.
And so I guess it goes back to the intent of what this bill is hoping to accomplish. If we're hoping to open up a new cottage industry in the state of Vermont that would allow frivolous lawsuit to big tech companies and allow for this massive, expansive landscape where, if you want to bring $100 million lawsuit, then so be it. If that's what you're hoping to accomplish, or if members are hoping to accomplish, then that's within everyone's, own prerogative. That's something that I don't agree with. So we would probably diverge on that point.
I feel really uncomfortable about trying to make a decision on this before the floor, considering we have 5 minutes. Are you planning on doing a straw poll? No. Okay. Are we planning on asking for tabling for another legislative day for the bill?
Let's get through this discussion first and then.
I'm not sure if I'm understanding this correctly. So if a person tries to do an injunction, it could cost like $1,000 or more. They'd only get paid back if they may get paid back the legal fees. They may not. And then this would be for every single data broker. They would need to file an injunction of $1,000 or more for each one if there was violations. So they would constantly be trying to do this over and over, potentially, if their information was kind of spread everywhere, which it is constantly being spread. So,
yeah, I mean, I think we heard on the floor, just a couple of days ago that there's only one registered data broker here in the state of Vermont. So
this isn't about data brokers anymore, though, right? Because
Right.
we actually took this out of the data.
but what I'm saying is, so when you start looking at the risk of exposure, I think it's actually far more confined and constrained than
There's 8,600 data brokers in the world. So that was kind of like the point.
I would posit that all 8,600 would not be disclosing the same data.
But this actually captures the entire internet, all public.
Which I think is actually a far more comprehensive model.
Sure. So again, so it's more, so there's way more potential for my address to be in way more places on the internet, that I am now eligible to ask every single one of those that are public on the internet to remove my information. If they don't, I can do an injunction for every single one at $1,000 plus a piece. And I
don't know.
continuously be chasing after them to ask them to remove my stuff.
With respect to the member, I don't know where the $1,000.
I'm just like throwing that out there as like, I don't know how much an injunction, I could ask Rick, I don't know how much an injunction.
But I just want to make sure that we don't put something in members' minds of like $1,000. It could be,
Yeah, we can ask.
it could be far less. So I just want to measure, the concern with the reality.
How is that different from what was previously contemplated?
So before somebody could they could recoup all of their fees and then also have someone else do it on their behalf. This has no assignee. It took out the assignee.
And that is the key distinction.
Okay, thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there is no assignee in this.
Yeah, I think, and we talked a little bit yesterday about the whole issue of the PRA and the assignee. And
Yep.
people's ability and right to seek.
You and I agree on that. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I'll just reiterate here that I think the whole issue of PRA and assignee is a separate issue that needs to be tackled probably by your committee.
Yep.
And regulated. I am personally, I would be fine adding it in and then have that work be done and have it then, come back. But I think people have to have a way to seek their rec days.
In the same vein of not putting information in people's heads, unwarranted, I need to be very clear that this committee is incredibly concerned about frivolous lawsuits and has zero interest in creating a system that would encourage them or provide for that. That is something that we have been concerned about for more than just this session.
Great.
And so I just can't let that statement slide without making it very clear that that's something that we're looking very closely at, very concerned about. Cure periods, all kinds of things like that have been proven to ensure that that doesn't happen. And we're very clear on making sure. I don't know if that's in this. Again, I've been listening to you. I haven't been reading. I don't know if that's in here as well, but I think that that's important to be another piece of any bill going forward.
Sure, periods and the like. Yeah, I appreciate the shared concern, Madam Vice Chair, on the frivolous lawsuits. So I think we actually would probably have something in common in trying to maybe amend the amendment in adding even more guardrails on that landscape and the shared concern that we have.
Quick question. It may better be directed to Rick, but I wanted to get it out there to help me remember. Public agencies, are there any other laws in the state that require them to have some of this information kept publicly? I'm thinking grand lists, I'm thinking, those kinds of things, not checklists or voting, etc.
It's definitely something that we discuss, and I'll defer to Rick on how this accommodates for that.
Thank you.
Last question. Yeah. So just thinking of this is actually a personal example of one where my small business nonprofit board, not thinking about data privacy, had asked me to, share a Google Doc with them that was publicly accessible of all of our donor lists so they could brainstorm and do all that kind of stuff. I assure the public that did not happen because I was like, that's a data privacy violation. But in that case, if I had allowed my board, and I've been on other, groups where data privacy concerns are not something that everybody is aware of. In that case, a nonprofit would potentially have information on either their, customers, families that are engaging in things, maybe they're volunteers, maybe they're donors. If I had let them do that and had a publicly accessible data sheet of all of this information, then we would also be eligible for violations against this. And I'm just thinking about in addition to education for municipalities and all that kind of stuff, one thing we took seriously with the data privacy bill last year was how do we educate all of the businesses, and you expanded the scope to everyone. So I'm just curious, what your thoughts are and what kind of research you did as far as getting buy-in from nonprofits and other groups that are now going to be at a risk of violating this law.
Again, I think it's still only applying to the covered persons of the immediate families. But insofar as testimony relating to nonprofits, I think that would be a great sector that we should receive testimony on this. I think it's a great idea, member. Shall I defer to Rick now?
Well, actually, we have to go to the floor.
All right.
Oh, I mean, I agree with public sector.
Yeah.
But that takes a lot of testimony, and we need to figure out how that could be done. Maybe something, if we decide to adopt that the effective date is pushed out and that we have Secretary of State's office maybe working with DLCT to come up with a way that happens. Make sure that we're not capturing. Make sure the municipalities know and know what to do. How much work is that gonna be for them as well? I think what's good for the goose is good for the gander too, right? But. And I see the expansion to all other businesses has opened the floodgates for more businesses coming to us and saying, no, don't do that. It's gonna kill our business. We're gonna, so, yeah. So we'll see, we need to go through the language and have some discussions with Rick on maybe a side by side of what ours did and what yours does. And see where we can go.
Always happy to come back.
Great.
I appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
It was appreciated. So.
Thank you.
We're back on the floor. We're back in here at 1 o'clock. And we're gonna hear from Lincoln Tech and Superintendent of Brown School District. I think, Rick, are you available later this afternoon, like 2 o'clock?
Should be. I think at 3 o'clock, but yeah, okay.
So I'll have you probably back in at 2.
Okay.
And we'll go through the language.
Okay.
Everybody good? Committee? Okay. Herb, our condolences to you and.
Yeah.
Your brother-in-law.
Yeah, thank you.
Happy birthday.
Yes.
Ready?
Thank you.
And any questions? We wind up getting off the floor. Before noon. As I can, maybe we can have a little bit of discussion on what people are thinking about what we've heard so far. Yeah.
Just, there is another, the Senate has another data privacy bill, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
My understanding is supposed to vote on this on the floor, so are we gonna spend it again or? Okay.
Yeah, there's no way we can bring this out to the floor and say, yeah, we're all good with it.
Just wanted to make sure I was clear on it. So this, I guess the amendment won't be considered today?
Correct.
We'll delay it.
That's good.
Thanks for bringing. Got to tell you.
I'm ready, but.